So today, we're going to dive into a pretty fascinating theological paper by Dr. Dale Moreau that completely turns the conversation about atheism on its head. It basically argues that unbelief isn't just, a lack of belief, but something way more fundamental to who we are.
And it all starts with this one question. Is atheism just a simple lack of belief? I mean, most people would probably say, yeah, of course. But the paper we're looking at today says, whoa, not so fast. It argues that this common definition, well, it barely even scratches the surface of what's really going on.
And boom, here it is, the paper's core thesis, stated about as bluntly as you can get. It reframes unbelief not as some intellectual choice, but as an ontological disorder. Now, ontological just means it's related to our very being, our existence. So the claim here is pretty radical, that unbelief is a kind of malfunction at the very core of what it means to be human. Let's unpack how in the world they build this argument.
Okay, so the paper starts by kind of pushing aside the usual debates you always hear. You know, the arguments from design or the origin of the universe, that kind of thing. It calls these arguments thin. Not because they're necessarily wrong, but because they only really talk about the what of belief. They completely miss the much deeper question of why some people disbelieve, even when they're presented with what others consider to be good evidence.
So to even begin to make its case for unbelief being this fundamental disorder, the paper says, first we have to clear a major hurdle, the modern definition of faith itself. I mean, the entire argument really hinges on getting this one concept right.
And this right here, this is the popular caricature that the paper is trying to dismantle. This is the definition you hear all the time from skeptics, right? That faith is just inherently irrational, a blind leap in the dark. It's belief without evidence, or maybe even in spite of the evidence.
But the paper immediately pushes back against that. It argues that the original biblical word for faith, the Greek word is pistis, it doesn't mean belief without evidence at all. Actually, it's something more like a rational trust, a warranted commitment that you make because of the available evidence. And to make this crystal clear, the paper uses a fantastic analogy, a jury's verdict. Think about it. A jury almost never has 100% absolute mathematical certainty. But what do? They weigh all the evidence that's been presented, and they make a committed decision beyond a reasonable doubt. The argument here is that biblical faith is supposed to work the exact same way, as a reasoned verdict, not just a blind guess. All right, so redefining faith like that really sets the stage for the paper's main event. The focus is about to shift big time. We're moving away from talking about what human beings do, like believe or not believe, and we're moving towards what this paper argues they fundamentally are. And this is the pivot. The whole conversation changes. We're not talking about belief as just a simple action anymore. Instead, the paper introduces this core identity from the Hebrew Bible that humans are, by their very nature, image bearers, the imago Dei. So what on earth does it mean to be an image bearer? Well, the paper uses this really powerful analogy from the ancient world. Imagine a king. He sets up statues, images, of himself all throughout his kingdom. These weren't just pretty decorations, they were stand-ins. They represented his rule and his authority in all the places he couldn't physically be at once. The paper argues that humans are designed to be just like that, living, breathing representatives of God in the physical world. It's not a job we do, it's baked into our very design. And if you accept this idea of the imago Dei, some really radical implications start to follow. See, if this imaging function is our core identity, the paper argues you can't just switch it off. It can only be misdirected. So from this viewpoint, atheism isn't seen as an absence of worship. It's a misdirection of it, pointing it towards other things, like yourself or your career or materialism. And agnosticism? That's framed as an act of suppression of the innate knowledge that supposedly comes with being an image bearer. In this framework, there's really no such thing as a neutral position. Okay, but wait, if all humans are designed to image the one true God, then why are there so many different religions? This is a huge question, and it brings us to maybe the most unique part of the paper's worldview. It uses a very specific and pretty ancient interpretation of the Tower of Babel story to explain the entire landscape of global religions, the very thing that's often used as an argument against theism.
All right, so according to this paper's reading of texts like Deuteronomy 32, the whole event at Babel was way more than just scattering people because of a language barrier. It was a cosmic political shakeup. First, humanity gets together and rebels. Then, God scatters them. But then, and this is the crazy part, he hands over the governance of these new nations to lesser divine beings, often called sons of God. The paper argues that these divine governors, they eventually went bad. They became corrupt. They started demanding worship for themselves, leading all the nations astray and becoming the so-called gods of the pagan pantheon. And what this does is completely reframe the whole problem of religious pluralism. From this perspective, the fact that there are tons of different world religions, it isn't some big surprise that challenges a biblical story. No, instead, it's presented as the predicted outcome of this cosmic disinheritance event at Babel. It totally flips the script on a very, very common skeptical argument.
Okay, so let's pull all these threads together. We've got faith, defined as a rational trust. We have humans as these constitutional image bearers, and we have the event at Babel as this cosmic political drama. So how do all these pieces combine to form one single cohesive picture of unbelief? This table really lays it out perfectly. The standard view, the one you hear most often, tends to see unbelief as an intellectual error. It happens inside a philosophical debate, and it involves neutral thinkers. But the paper's framework, it sees unbelief as an ontological disorder, a condition that affects a suppressing image bearer, all taking place inside a much bigger cosmic spiritual conflict. I mean, these are two radically different ways of looking at the exact same thing. So when you put it all together, the ultimate conclusion of this whole framework is that there is no neutral ground. Atheism and agnosticism aren't seen as passive or detached or objective positions. Instead, they're understood as active conditions, a fundamental misdirection of our core human function, and an ongoing suppression of knowledge we were designed to have. Which brings us to the paper's final, and I think really provocative question. If this worldview is correct, if humanity is constitutionally designed to be representatives inside an ongoing cosmic drama, then is it even possible for anyone to be a neutral observer? And that question right there, it really captures the core challenge of this entire argument.